Explosions outside the Kabul airport killed a number of U.S. service members and caused civilian casualties. The escalation of violence has complicated the Biden administration's plan to evacuate those remaining in Afghanistan. Anthony Cordesman is chairman for strategy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He has served as a consultant to the Departments of State and Defense during the Afghan and Iraq wars. Tony, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mary.
What are the implications from these deadly explosions?
I think that they are a warning that we are watching a transition to a very unstable Afghanistan. The fact that Taliban have largely taken over doesn't mean they control the country or the various factions and divisions in it are over. And it's very clear that ISIS-K is a much more extreme group in some ways than the Taliban is. I think this is sort of typical of what happens in many countries when an insurgent or revolutionary group takes over. It's defeated the government, but it doesn't mean it is a government. It's coherent, or you see an end to violence and terrorism.
So what complications will this add to the effort to meet that evacuation deadline?
Well, I think it already has created some very serious problems. People are having to find new entry points. Everyone is trying to rush their own citizens and the Afghans that supported them out, not just the U.S., but of course our allies and other countries. They're trying to find ways to work around the entrance to the airport, but there really is no good alternative in many cases.
But Tony, are there enough American troops on the ground to secure the airport and to deter further attacks? Or is this just going to keep happening?
Well, it can keep happening. We are partly dependent on the Taliban. It is a very large airport. The ISIS-K probably has weapons which certainly can bypass the immediate screening groups of troops at the gates and entrance. And all it takes is one person with a bomb wrapped around their body to sort of infiltrate in with the other Afghans and people trying to get into the airport to create another incident. There is no magic way to totally ensure that there won't be acts of terrorism and carry out an evacuation at the same time. But I think it is certainly clear that people have cracked down as much as possible, that there'll be a much better perimeter defense than there was before these incidents occurred.
So the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby says to prepare for contingencies. How can we do that given these recent events?
Well, you certainly can try to find more use of helicopters or other ways to bring people in. You can extend some aspects of the defenses near the gates. You can put more people into the perimeter. You can provide unmanned sort of reconnaissance systems to provide more coverage that goes deeper in looking at the crowds and at people who might be coming into the perimeter. There are a lot of things you can do that will certainly help. I think the problem we have sometimes as outsiders is to assume you can be leak-proof and that anything that happens is the result of negligence. The truth is that there's only so much even the best system can do.
Tony, you wrote a piece called Prepare Now for the Next Crisis in Afghanistan. What is that next crisis?
Well, the crisis we already see is this is a country of 37 million people. The refugees are certainly important, and our citizens are certainly important. But the fact is, what happens to the Afghans? We already see the banking system has collapsed. Nobody has money. You have major problems in terms of food supplies. Employment, jobs have almost collapsed in many urban areas. The entire economy is frozen. The aid money that was critical for the functioning of the government And really, the major source of real incomes for many Afghans has been frozen. And no one knows what's going to happen next or when any shifts will occur, or even when the Taliban will try to have a functioning government. So the crisis we have is not one of several 100,000 refugees. It's one of about 36 million people who aren't leaving Afghanistan.
Well, I mean, Tony, I really do feel bad for the Afghans that are left in Afghanistan, but how does that relate to our strategic interests for Americans?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's one where the historical precedents indicate that at least as this crisis continues, a lot of our strategic partners and other countries are going to question American resolve, how much American security guarantees are really worth. You already see that in Europe and in Asia. You see it in the Middle East. It takes time to really reestablish that you are actually capable of protecting and being an effective ally. A lot of it is leadership, some of it is simply time. But are countries like Iran, or North Korea, China, or Russia able to exploit this situation, at least in the short term? The answer is clearly yes.
Tony, the president has said to the terrorists responsible for the airport attack, quote, "We will hunt you down and make you pay." How?
Well, you certainly can often locate centers of operation for groups like SSK. They certainly do their best to hide in the population, to not sort of target themselves by communicating in ways we can trace. But if we have sufficient technical means often to locate a specific target and even track the movements of a key leader or person, it can often take time to get to the point where you're absolutely certain that you can kill that person or attack them or capture them without, in the process, hurting civilians. But sooner or later, you can get to at least some of the leadership cadres. And if there is a large open training center that isn't buried within the local population, or there's a fixed facility, you can attack that. We need to be careful, however. Can you suddenly get rid of an entire extremist movement? Obviously, you can't. Quite aside from ISIS-K inside Afghanistan, very large numbers of ISIS fighters survived in Iraq and Syria and continue to attack there. So is this something that we will be able to defeat in any serious way? I mean, sort of totally halt? The answer is no. It's going to be an ongoing battle at best.
Well, Tony, let's talk in the broader sense. How should the Pentagon really manage counterterrorism efforts moving forward? How do they hit those training bases that you talked about?
Well, often you have to be very careful. You don't want to go in and simply bomb a facility if it has a significant civilian population. You characterize the target very carefully. You figure out the areas where civilians aren't present. If it is a large, isolated facility, that's easy. Then you can target it. But what we've been doing now for well over a decade is creating a mix of intelligence systems that mixes human intelligence, short-range intelligence collection assets, satellite coverage, and financial coverage, and that allows us to target over time the groups almost anywhere in the world. Is it something where you can target everybody suddenly? The answer is no. Does it mean we can wipe out organizations even in a relatively small country? Not by ourselves, but we can certainly deter and damage them, and often deflect them so they focus on local targets rather than international ones.
And Tony, you've written in your latest commentary that we need to be sure to capture the data necessary to learn from the experience in Afghanistan. What is that data?
Well, there is a vast amount of data on how the Taliban took over. A lot of it was somewhat ignored. People focused on the fighting, the military dimension, not the political dimension. We certainly need to examine how it gradually sort of infiltrated, corrupted parts of the Afghan forces and government, changed its messaging to reach out to the Afghan people. All of these techniques are lessons as to how other groups are likely to emerge in the world, some of them closer and more able to threaten the United States. We have a lot to learn from being much more realistic about how capable the Taliban was, because we spent so much time trying to justify our aid efforts that we often, frankly, did not tell the truth about the fighting and the progress the Taliban was making.
So how can we apply those lessons to future military operations? So what are those lessons that we haven't learned from Afghanistan, from past wars, that we need to start considering from now?
Well, one is that and perhaps the most critical, is our nation-building efforts more or less failed. But the civil dimension, creating a system where the people feel secure, are willing to support the government, where when you actually win a military victory, the end result drives the insurgent or the terrorist group out of the area because you followed up with the civil progress people need to see to become active in resisting those groups. This is critical. We did not do well in the civil dimension. I think another key issue is we need to understand that insurgencies are not terrorism or extremism. They are sophisticated political movements as well as military ones. And we characterize the Taliban far too much in terms of being an extremist group and ignored how efficient and effective it was becoming. I think at the same time, we failed to basically realize we had to have an understanding of the countryside, and we focused far too much on defending the cities rather than the country.
All right, well, Tony, we're going to have to wrap it up at that. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your views with us.
A pleasure. Thank you.